still playing with closed captions, trying to figure out what the proper technique is. So there will be this black bar on the bottom that may interrupt my slides. I haven't fixed my slides yet for closed captioning, but that is the next step. So I just apologize in advance for that. Thank you all for being here. My name is Paul Steen. I'm a watershed ecologist at the Huron River Watershed Council in Ann Arbor. I've helped run the stream monitoring program side of MiCorps, but I'm also involved on a daily basis with the CLMP, helping a variety of different aspects of that. And one of the things I do is lead the chlorophyll presentation. So that's what we're going to do now, Chlorophyll-a. All right, so there we go. So here is kind of our outline for the next hour. I'm going to just briefly talk about what Chlorophyll-a is, but most of this presentation is actually going into the nuts and bolts of how to take this measurement, because it's a fairly complicated thing to do, and lots of steps. So much of the explanation goes to that. I'm going to talk about when you're supposed to be taking this measurement. I'm going to talk about the two phases of the collection, because you need to collect water and you need to sample that water. So there's a step 1 and a step 2. And then a little bit about the turn-ins and the end of year. So let's jump into that. So to start, what is Chlorophyll-a? And I think actually the way to answer that question is to just go a scale bigger and talk about what is algae. So that's what we have in the center 2 photos here. And algae is a single-celled organism. It occurs in all natural waters. It's the base of our food chain. It's what provides life into lakes. If you had a lake without algae in it, you would actually have a swimming pool, or maybe you would have a cup of drinking water. So it's needed. This is a needed thing in our lakes to make them the vibrant, unique places for life that we all enjoy. So that's what algae is. Now what's Chlorophyll-a? Well, Chlorophyll-a is the green pigment contained in algae. Chlorophyll-a is what allows photosynthesis to happen and turning the power of the sun into usable energy for everything in the lake. And, you know, not just the lake, but all green plants everywhere have Chlorophyll-a. So that's why this is an important thing to know. It's needed in a lake, but certainly we have lakes in Michigan that have too much algae. And where on that spectrum does your lake fall? Too little, too much, a happy medium? The pictures here on the left would be probably a mesotrophic lake. There's several people out boating and fishing, enjoying the lake. It's still, a lake like this will still have algae in it, and it will still have a moderate amount, and that's providing for the good fishing here. The lake on the right is a hypereutrophic lake, pretty close to where I live. It's Ford Lake in Washtenaw County. And hypereutrophic, meaning there's so much algae here that it's like on the far right of this nutrient thermometer that hopefully Eric showed you earlier in the day. And a lake like this has too much, and a lake like this will have harmful algae blooms. It will have lower dissolved oxygen as the algae decomposes. So obviously not a good situation. And there's thousands, millions of dollars invested in trying to keep Ford Lake from turning into this every summer, because it's on the Huron River, and there's all these communities upstream that contribute to this phosphorus. So this is a very important nutrient to have a handle on, so you understand what's going on in my lake. Is there enough for things to live? Is there too much? So that's what we're getting into today. So let's talk about how to go about getting these samples. First of all, everything I'm going to show you in terms of documentation is really easy to get online. You can go to MiCorps.net, go to the lakes drop down, and then find CLMP documents. Within the CLMP documents page, there'll be sections for each of these major parameters that you've been looking at. So pretty easy to find the chlorophyll section and find the thing that says chlorophyll schedule. That brings you to this. On these schedules, you will find your county listed. And then next to that, there'll be the drop-off location where you eventually will bring your frozen samples. Then the next column over has the sampling dates. So the goal is for you to get all 5 of these samples. There's a sample 1 that's in May, a sample 2 that's in June, and so on. You'll notice that they're always following between the 10th and the 20th of the month, with the exception of that final sample. Sample 5 will be the same time that your summer phosphorus is taken. And basically that represents the end of the season for you. Once you get your summer phosphorus sample, once you get your 5th sample of chlorophyll, that will also be your last Secchi disc. That will wrap everything up for you. Then the final column is when you're supposed to turn these in. So there's 2 turn-in dates. And the first turn-in date listed there is for the May and the June sample. And then the second sample, or sorry, the second date is the July, August, September sample. The reason we split this up is twofold. First of all, it just gets samples to the Eagle laboratory more rapidly, so they're able to start processing them. So there's not such a backlog at the end of the season. And the second reason is that having an early turn-in, this June turn-in, enables Joe to look at your samples, make sure you're doing everything okay, not running into any issues that may make all your samples for the rest of the season end up getting rejected. So a good example would be you don't wrap your samples in aluminum foil. And you turn them in, and Joe catches it, and she sends you a note and says, hey, make sure you do this. I have to reject these samples. In your next 3 samples, be sure you wrap it in aluminum foil. So it gives a chance for some of those errors to be found and corrected. So anyway, find your county on this document. You'll know exactly where you're supposed to turn things in, and it reminds you of all the timing for when you're supposed to take your samples. It's a 2-sided piece of paper, so all the counties are listed on it, front or back. So another document that you will be having to fill out is the data form for chlorophyll. This is a 2-parter document. There's 2 of these, because there's a data form 1 that will cover your May and your June, and that will get turned in with those samples. And then there's a data form 2 that will cover your July, August, September, and that gets turned in with that batch of samples. The data sheets are pretty basic information, and it's a lot of the same information that is on other data sheets that you have already entered, like with Secchi and phosphorus. You know, the important thing is that it's saying your lake, and it's saying your location, your name, and then we'll talk about some of the specifics for chlorophyll, and underneath where it says sampling event, we'll talk about what some of those numbers mean in just a little bit. Now, this is an important one, and that is that 4 or 5 samples are required for chlorophyll. So you may recall you were told earlier in the day that you need at least 8 Secchi disc measurements. So this is very similar. You need at least 4, preferably 5, chlorophyll measurements. That's because lakes change over the course of the season. you're doing one of these every month. So in order to understand the changes that are occurring in the algae community over the course of those months, you need to do one every month. In the spring, diatoms are plentiful in lakes, but by late summer, you have blue-green algae who enjoy the warmer temperatures. And then when lakes turn over in the fall again, you get more diatoms. So like all of this is affecting the amount of chlorophyll-a in your lake. So that's why we make sure it is spread, all the sampling is spread out over the course of the summer. So if you don't get that, let's say you only get 1 to 3 measurements done, then you will not get an average chlorophyll measurement, and we won't be able to tell you what your trophic status is based on chlorophyll. So it just kind of harms you in terms of the amount of data you end up getting back at the end of the season. All right, so let's take a look at our equipment. I have one of obviously sitting here next to me. And then when you register for this, you'll get this, and you'll also get just a bag of miscellaneous stuff. All right, now it may look like a little bit here and a little bit there, and it's hard to figure out what's going on. But all of this has been carefully configured over time to produce highly accurate chlorophyll measurements for you. So it's homemade, but the reality is a lot of water quality equipment starts off as homemade before someone turns it into a company. So we just haven't gotten to that point yet. So let me walk you through what we have. This is your main sampler. This is what you will be dropping off the side of your boat and getting your water samples in. And this thing is meant to be fully disassemblable. So you start off like this. You take that off. You can take the stopper off. Notice this has 2 holes in this rubber stopper. That's to let water in and to let air out. This is meant to be taken apart. So this chain kind of comes over that. Normally it holds it in, but you just take that right out, and then you can disassemble that. And at the bottom of this, there are free weights that help propel your sampler down into the water column once you drop it off the side of your boat. So notice we don't glue these in or anything. That's because they need to be taken out and dried to prevent rust and your sampler from falling apart before the end of the season. And many people get these things to last for a number of years. So you only have to rebuy it if you need a new one. So I'll just put that together again here a second. Now I'm not going to show you everything because some of these things are pretty simple, but there's a few things that are a little trickier that I want to show you. And this would be the next thing. It's called a filter holder. And you'll see it in action in the video in a little bit, but you should know that this screws apart. And then after you screw it apart, there will be this rubber O-ring that sits on this filter part, or it's like a mesh. Easily lost, right? But if you don't have this, your sample will leak really badly and you won't get a good result. So you have to be careful with that to not lose it. Just when you're washing everything off, just leave it on your counter to dry. But whenever it's dried, screw it back together so you don't lose that piece. You will get a syringe that looks like this. It fits 60 milliliters. And these are meant to go together. So your syringe will have threads in it. Your filter holder will not have threads. So they're not technically designed to work together, but they fit very nicely. You just have to turn it and get it in there. And then you can see this is eventually what you'll use. And it fits in and fall apart. But you just have to kind of screw it by hand, and these threads in the syringe don't actually matter that much. Okay, then the other thing I was going to just quick show you, same idea. There's this piece of tubing, and once again, you will use it in this way. You kind of jam it on the end of your syringe, and it holds in there, but it looks like it shouldn't, but it fits in there very, very nicely. And you'll see how all this gets used in our video. Okay, now what else should I show you? Here's just another look at that larger sampler. I think I covered all of that except the measured line, which we can talk about. Okay, so some things you will have to provide, and there's a whole list later, but I think the measured line is probably the one that will be take the most prep on your part. So you want to just buy a standard rope. This one sure looks just like a clothesline rope. And it's probably about 50 feet or so of rope, and you just attach it on here. Now notice that every foot is marked by hand. And what I would do is also, maybe with a different color, mark the, this is like permanent marker on here. And every 10 feet, mark it with a different color. So the idea is that you will very rapidly be able to take out this rope and count it and know exactly how much of slack you have on that rope. You'll see why in a moment. Okay, so that was like the full kit. Some of you may have just bought in a resupply kit. If your lake group already has one of these bigger samplers on hand, then every year you'll just need to buy those things that are the consumables. So it's just the filters, it's the vials, it's the dropper bottle of magnesium carbonate, which we'll talk about, labels and so on. So those are the things that get used up every year. So you don't necessarily need this big guy, and you might get the cheaper resupply kit. Here's some other things that you'll provide. I talked about the measured line. Other things to make sure you have on hand is aluminum foil. I'm sure you have some in your kitchen, but you will need to use a little bit of it up every time you do a sample. So you want to make sure that you don't run out. Things like your PFD for your boat, anchor. We never use ballpoint pens, right? We always do things in pencils or in Sharpies, nothing that will run when it gets wet. And you'll have this handy for your phosphorus sample too, but a little freezer pack and a little ice pack for your samples. Okay, final thing to talk about with equipment before we jump into the process is the filter. You will get a little baggie in your kit that looks a lot like this. There will be blue circles and there will be these white circles. The reason we give you both is the little blue circles prevent the filters from sticking to each other. They're like separator sheets is what they're called. So we don't want you to, this is very important, we don't want you to use these blue things for your actual sampling. That is a packaging that is basically impermeable. So if you try to push a water sample through that blue separator sheet, it totally won't work. You'll end up getting a bad result and your sample will get rejected. But the reason a lot of people confuse this is those little blue sheets, look more like what a coffee filter would look like because they're kind of translucent. You can hold them up to the light and you can see the light coming through. So you might think, oh, this is probably the filter because it looks like I can see pores in here. It's more of a plasticky material, and it doesn't actually let water through it, even though it looks like it can. And the white sheet, the actual filter that you'll end up using, looks more like junk. It's you can't see through it at all. It feels just like a plastic piece of it doesn't look like a filter that you're used to. So that's why a lot of people get these things confused with each other. So that's why I make it such a big deal about it, because you have to go against your natural instincts when you use this. So you want to use the thing that you don't think you should be using. All right. The blue piece is the bad piece. The white piece is the good piece. Use the white piece, the white filter. All right. Okay, next step. Well, really step one. We just talked about the equipment, but now we're actually going to get out there on the boat and do this. So let me clean this area up here. So you start off just like you do with your other sampling. You take your boat to that deepest point on your lake. You're going to, as you approach it, you cut your motor and you drift over that deepest point of the lake. You'll want to put down your anchor, let the anchor catch you, and hopefully you'll end up at that point. During this process, either in your house, or if there's a couple of you going out to do this, someone can start filling out the data sheet as you go. What's the date? Where are we? What are our names? That type of thing. And then you do a Secchi disk measurement. So chlorophyll actually requires you to do a Secchi disk measurement. It's just part of the process of the chlorophyll too. Now, chances are you're already going to be doing one of these Secchi disk measurements because you're enrolled in Secchi disk. But for chlorophyll, you do need to do it, and that information will go onto your data sheet. So just as a reminder, you lower that disk until it disappears from view. You raise it back up, both times recording those depths, and then you average those two depths together to get the final Secchi disk measurement. And why do we do that? Why is this required? Well, here's a little graphic to give you a sense of why. So you can see this fellow's on his boat. He dropped the Secchi disk down, and let's say he got a depth of about 10 feet. Let's say it's 10 feet that he got. Well, the way it works with light penetration going into water is that light goes through twice the Secchi depth. So if you're measuring a depth of 10 with your disk, it actually means light is penetrating down 20 feet into the water column. So when we drop our chlorophyll sampler down into the water column, we want it to go all down that full 20, because even though our eyes can't see it, the light is getting down there. And that means if there's light down there, there's going to be algae down there. So that's called the euphotic zone. It's that full lit portion of the water column. So we're on our data sheet, we're going to record both the Secchi depth and the composite sample depth that is twice the Secchi depth. So in this case, it would be 10 on the left side and 20 on the right side. Now here are some, it just begs some questions. So these naturally come up. These are situations that people will run into. What if my lake is too shallow to double the Secchi depth? Let's say your lake is only 15 feet, but your Secchi depth is 10. Well, obviously you can't go down to 20 in that situation. So What you do there is you just go to the bottom. When you do your chlorophyll sample, you go as far down as you can, basically to the bottom, but you never actually want to hit the bottom with your equipment and cause like a plume of sediment to come up. It's the same thing that you do when you have dissolved oxygen measurements. You never actually drop this and touch the bottom with it if you can help it. So in that case, just stop about a foot before you hit the bottom and record that as your composite sample depth. And it's the same issue if your Secchi disc is already at the very bottom. Obviously, you can't double it. So then you would just do the same thing. You would just bring that composite sampler all the way down to nearly to the bottom of the lake without actually hitting the bottom of the lake. Okay, so we took our Secchi disc measurement. We got out there, we took our Secchi disc measurement, we doubled it. We now know how far down we need to drop this thing. And what we do next is take the sampler apart. As I showed you, you unscrew it, take the stopper off, take the chain off, and you take the amber bottle out and rinse it with lake water so that we're sure that it's clean. No gunk has settled in there when we weren't paying attention. This is also the point at which some people might accidentally knock their sampler off the boat and lose their weights. Remember, the weights in here are loose, so don't do that. It's if that does happen to you, which it happens to somebody every summer, if it does happen to you, you'll have to contact Gene at MLSA to get the person who sends you equipment, and you'll have to apologize and ask for new equipment, which no one wants to do. Okay, the next thing you do is here's our rope that we attach to our sampler. You want to let out enough rope that you can go all the way to that composite sample depth. So let's say I'm letting out 20 feet here. And then when you hit 20 feet, or whatever that depth may be for you, you're going to mark it with a clothespin. Okay? Because what you're going to do is throw this rope into the lake, let it sit there on the top, then release your sampler and just let it go and let it free fall. You're going to have this clothespin, and as soon as the line is taut and the clothespin is at the surface of the water, that's when you know that you have reached the right depth. Then what you do is bring this sampler up at a slow, steady rate. What that rate is depends on the depth of your lake. So this is something that's different for everybody. I'll give you some pointers on how to practice this. But basically, if you're only dropping your sampler 10 feet into the water, this movement will be slow. If you have to bring it up 30, 40 feet because you have a high Secchi and a high composite sample depth, you'll do it a lot faster. Now, it's easy to check when you get back to the top because you have a goal. Your goal is to get this bottle, you'll to take it apart again so you can look at it. Your goal is to get this bottle 2/3 to 3/4 full. So somewhere around there, about where my finger is. You probably can't see it because I'm getting it cut off. And the reason for that is if it came back and it was completely full, then it leaves you unsure of at what point it filled up. Did it fill up at the very bottom? In which case I don't have the algae community from the top of the lake. And then if you don't get enough water, if it's too empty, you're not going to have the water you need to do the rest of the steps. Okay, so if you pull it out in either of those situations, there's not enough water or it's completely full, you have to redo that process. And it might take a couple tries because ultimately it comes down to how fast are you pulling your string through the water column and raising it back up. So that's why it takes some practice. But once you figure it out, you'll probably be good for the rest of the summer. Okay. So you have a good amount in here. Then you give this some swirls to get things mixed. You never do that. Just gentle swirling, maybe a light inverting is fine, or gentle swirling. Nothing too vigorous that's going to start destroying the algae cells in there. Then you will have smaller bottles like this. You will pour the water into that, and you'll fill 2 of these. Okay, then, oh, I don't have it on hand, but you'll have these little droppers that are full of magnesium carbonate. And what those do is stabilize the algae so it's less likely to break apart and transport. And you will take that little dropper, mix it. You can mix the dropper up really good, and put 5 drops of that stuff into each bottle. Then once again, cap, gently invert or swirl to mix. Nothing vigorous. You never want to really shake algae cells up. Then things go into cold storage. Your kit that you brought out there with you, maybe you have to do dissolved oxygen yet, so you go ahead and do that. Maybe you have to get your summer phosphorus sample yet, so you do that. Wrap up whatever you need to do on your boat. But as far as what you do on your boat in chlorophyll, that's it. But now there's the indoor portion. So this is a wet affair and it's complicated. So it's kind of hard to show you on Zoom. And so what we have is a video to watch now. And I want you to know that this video will always be available for you to watch. Once again, you can go to our website. You can go to Lake Training. And then if you scroll down on the Lakes Training page, you'll come across a bunch of YouTube videos. And you just want to find the one that's for the chlorophyll sampling. And if you specifically just want the filtering, which we're going to show you, then you go to the video where it starts at 5 minutes and 50 seconds. So that's what we're going to do. And actually, to do that, I need to exit out of here. And I'm going to bring up the video. You know what? I have to stop sharing a second because I didn't enable the sound. So let me do that. Yep, sound, share sound. Okay, this should work. We'll go to the video, and Joe narrated this 10 years ago, so I'll let her voice take it over until we get through this filtering section.
The best place to filter a chlorophyll sample is indoors, by a sink, and out of direct sunlight. Make sure you have all of the equipment listed. Ready to go? First, unscrew and open the filter holder. Use tweezers to pick up and move the filter. Never use your fingers. The filter is a glossy and opaque white circle. Be sure not to use the filter separators, which are translucent and look more like tissue paper. Center the filter on the screen and place the O-ring on top of the filter. Screw the filter holder back together until it is moderately tight and place it to the side for the moment. Grab the syringe and the small piece of clear plastic tubing. You can push the tubing onto the syringe. It doesn't fit perfectly, but it will not slip off if you work at it. Swirl or invert one of the amber bottles to mix. Rinse the syringe by drawing up sample water until the syringe is full, and then empty it. Then fill it up to the 60 milliliter line. With the syringe pointing up, tap it to force air bubbles to the top. Push the syringe plunger until the end of the plunger is lined up with the 50 milliliter mark. Attach the filter holder to the syringe. Like the tubing, it won't snap into place, but you can get it to fit snugly. Slowly push the chlorophyll sample through the filter holder and adjust your pressure to achieve a rapid drop rate. Pushing too hard may rip the filter, so avoid excessive pressure. As you push the plunger, make sure that no water is leaking out the side of the filter holder. If your sample has a lot of algae or other particles in it, it may become too difficult to push the full 50 milliliters of sample through the filter. In these situations, stop pushing and note how much water you were able to filter by reading the side of the syringe. There is a place on the datasheet for you to record this information. After filtering the water, separate the filter holder from the syringe and unscrew it. Using a safety pin and tweezers, fold the filter in quarters with the algae on the inside. The filter will probably stick a bit to the filter holder, and it requires a steady hand and some practice to do this job smoothly. Remember, never touch the filter with your fingers. Put the folded filter into a sample vial and cap it. Place a filled-out sample label onto the vial lengthwise so that none of the label is wrapped upon itself. Let's take a look at what a correctly filled-out sample label looks like. You need to use a fine-tipped, permanent black marker to fill out the sample labels. In addition to the basic lake information, write CA in the parameter code box and write MgCO3, which stands for magnesium carbonate, into chemicals added. Remember, you added magnesium carbonate in an earlier step. On the label for your second sample, write REP next to the lake name. This is short for replicate. You now have one sample complete. Congratulations! Now you get to do it all over again with your second sample bottle. Once both samples are complete, wrap the vials completely with aluminum foil to keep all light out. This foil wrapping step is critical. Unwrapped samples cannot be accepted for laboratory analysis. Write your lake's name and the sample month on the foil packet. The samples go into a Ziploc bag with your lake name, county, and field ID number. Fold the datasheet, place it into a separate Ziploc bag so it stays dry, and place it in the bag with your samples. Storing your data sheet with the samples is a good way to make sure the paperwork never gets lost. And then everything goes into the freezer until it is time to turn it in.
Oh, Paul, we can't hear you.
Yep, I appreciate that,
Perfect.
Eric. All right, so you have taken your sample and it's in the freezer now, and there it sits. It was mentioned in the video, but just to reiterate, you do this whole process twice because one is your primary sample and the other is your replicate, and you do hand in those at the same time. So yeah, so just to point that out. Again, this is, it's cut off at the bottom. So this is where my closed captions are a problem. Here, let's just do this. Okay, so in the video, it mentioned that that if your filter simply can't handle the amount of algae that your lake may have, that you may have to stop filtering in the middle. So you might not be able to do that full 50 milliliters, the 50 cc's. And if you keep pushing, like if your filter stops filtering and you keep pushing on it really, really hard, trying to get every drop of water through that filter, it may just burst the filter apart entirely and rip it and create a hole. And if you do that, obviously the sample is ruined and that can't be used. So it's better to be safe than sorry. If you're starting to get significant pressure as you push that plunger down, do what the video suggested. And what you do is you just write in the amount here. So let's say you got 45 cc's, 45 milliliters through. You could write 45 in here. Okay, I'll go back to the other view. Okay, just as a reminder again, you're turning in either 2 or 3 of these samples together. They are frozen. They go to this location. You never want to just leave it at the front door and expect that it will be fine. This is how things thaw and samples get ruined. Like you actually have to go into these offices and hand it to a person. Or they might actually have a freezer in their lobby that's like ready for you to put your sample there. So that's why all these have to be done during business hours of these offices. Now, if you can't make this as we have these turn-ins set up, you can call the contact here and see what they say. If that doesn't work out, you can call Joe or Eric or email them and to set up alternative solutions for the turn-in problem. But we do encourage you to try to stick to these turn-ins and the proper turn-in times, because that's how the program's set up to expect you at those times. Now, so here's some reasons that samples get rejected in chlorophyll sampling, and they've kind of all been covered at one time or another during this presentation, but it's good to know. You don't want to go through all this work and then we can't even use your sample. So make sure your samples are collected in that proper interval of time. The 10 days, most months, are when we want to see the samples be taken. If you turn in a sample that's on the blue separator sheet, that's bad. That will not get accepted. The lab will certainly realize it, because what the lab does is that they put your filter into ethanol and dissolve it, and then from there kind of extract the chlorophyll. And if the filter doesn't play well with its chemicals, then they know that you used a separator sheet. So it's usually a pretty obvious mistake. Yeah, so don't do that. Don't use a separator sheet. Please make sure your samples are wrapped in foil like you saw in that video. We don't want any light touching the algae cells. That's kind of what we're trying to prevent here, because then there could be a little bit of growth. It does get put in the freezer, and the samples will die, and it won't grow. But before that happens, we have to make sure that all the light is removed, so there is no growth of those samples. And then, as I just mentioned, if things don't get delivered correctly, it's possible that your sample could thaw, and then we wouldn't be able to use it. All right, and that's it for chlorophyll sampling. So if anyone has any questions, I know there was some chatting going on. I can answer questions. Yeah, so let's see. Open it up to you guys.
Thanks, Paul. That was really great and informative. The chlorophyll procedure has a lot of different steps involved, so it's nice to be able to have you walk us through it like that, and the video really helps too. I think we were able to keep up on the few questions that came in during the presentation, but once again, we'll remind everyone online, if you have questions about the procedure, about what we do with the data, about turn-in processes, those kinds of things, now is your chance to ask about them. And of course, we always take your questions all year long, but here's a chance for you to ask them now.
Looks like I'm seeing one that you guys might have missed. One person said they're missing the flexible tubing in their kit.
Oh, thanks for catching that, Paul.
Yeah. Oh, wait, it was a direct message to me. That's why.
Oh.
So if that happens, if that happens to any of you, you're missing any particular thing, you can always get in touch with Jean Roth at MLSA. She's the one that sends you all of your stuff, your phosphorus, your Secchi disc, all your chlorophyll gear, and she'll just get an extra piece of tubing into the mail, and so you'll have it. So that's really kind of the rule for if anything goes missing. If you need more filters, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for pointing that out. I was like, I can't believe I missed it, but that's because someone was sneaky and sent it right to you. So,
Yeah.
But it does happen, right? We put together a big old assembly line in February, and we pulled together all the materials and pieces. So there's a chance that something fell on the floor or something while we were doing that. So thank you for asking about that. And we put in the chat, you know, Jean's direct email address. I'll also point out that we have all of our contact information is available on our website. And I put the link to our contact page in there. And you can always just email MiCorps@msu.edu, and that gets to everybody. And so if you're not sure who to contact, you can reach us there as well. Here's a question that came in. Can we use a Lamont water monitoring kit to collect water samples? Paul, you want to take that one?
Well, you could for your own benefit and knowledge, but that is not something that the MiCorps program would use and put into our publicly accessible database that's used by state and researchers, and just because we don't have any say into the quality control of those results. So by all means do it for yourself, but it's not something that will be a part of the program.